Romans 8:26 says that the Spirit of God intercedes for us with groanings too deep for words. And many believers say this refers to the gift of tongues or some private prayer language. But there are 7 things in this passage you cannot miss if you really want to understand what this passage is saying. So let's jump into the text. All right, Romans 8:26, it says, "Likewise, the Spirit helps us in our weakness. For we don't know what to pray for as we ought to, but the Spirit himself intercedes for us with groanings too deep for words." Now, there are 7 things we need to look at. Number 1, the Spirit of God here in Romans chapter 8, and this is what I encourage you to do when you read the Bible. Notice repeating words. It really helps you understand the main point of the passage. The word Spirit and the concept of the Spirit of God, he's referred to 23 times, at least in the English Standard Version that I use. 23 times the Spirit of God is referenced just in this chapter. And specifically, the Spirit of God is, referred to in connection with our identity as children of God most of the time. So, for instance, if you go to verse 9 of the same chapter, it says, "If in fact the Spirit of God dwells in you, anyone who doesn't have the Spirit of Christ does not belong to him." And then you can go down to verse 15 and 16 as well, speaking of our sonship, our adoption, right? "You didn't receive the spirit of slavery to fall back into fear, but you've received the spirit of adoption as sons and daughters, by whom we cry, Abba, Father." The Spirit himself bears witness with our spirit that we are indeed children of God. So it's interesting that a lot of the times in this passage, the Spirit of God is in connection to or relating to our actual sonship and our adoption as children of God. The last verse is in verse 23. "Not only creation, but we ourselves who have the first fruits of the Spirit groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for adoption as sons, the redemption of our bodies." That's what Paul wants us to know. So that's the first thing that you can't miss, is that when we get to verse 26, the Spirit of God is I guess one of the biggest points of this passage is the Spirit of God relating to our adoption. So when I read the Bible and I notice repeating ideas or words, I want to make sure I allow that to be in the back of my mind as I approach this passage. I just want to be thinking about that and how that might, influence my interpretation and reading of this text, and how the spirit of adoption relates to what I'm reading here. The second thing to know is this: the overall context of Romans chapter 8, all the way down to verse 39 or 40, I think it's 39. The whole context is anticipating future glory, the redemption of our bodies as children of God, right? We're anticipating that full redemption and glorification and resurrection as children of God, but we're currently in mortal bodies enduring present suffering, weakness. Okay, let me show you a few verses to back this up, and this will influence how and help us interpret correctly verse 26. "If the Spirit of him who raised Jesus from the dead dwells in you, he who raised Jesus, Christ Jesus, from the dead will also give life," referring to that glorification and resurrection, "to your mortal bodies through his Spirit who dwells in you." Go down to verse 17. It says, "If we're children, then heirs, heirs of God and fellow heirs with Christ, provided we suffer with him, in order that we may also be glorified with him." So notice the connection between suffering now, presently, versus, alongside glorification later. Okay? Go down to verse 19. "Creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the sons of God." That's referring to our redemption, our glorification, right? Being resurrected and revealed as children of God. Go down to verse 23. I'm just trying to show you the overall context of this passage is we are waiting for future glory in these mortal bodies and in the present suffering we're going through now. Not only the creation, but we ourselves who have the first fruits of the Spirit groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for adoption as sons. So the context when we get to verse 26, the point is we are waiting eagerly for the redemption of our bodies, for glorification, this hope that we have that we're patiently waiting for. Then we get to verse 26, right? So when we read that the Spirit helps us in our weakness, the Spirit intercedes for us with groanings too deep for words, that relates to the overall main point, that we are waiting for so much more than what is currently happening. We're waiting for a better reality, a better mode of existing, right? This is all about the Spirit and our sonship, okay? The other thing to take note of is this groaning here. I'm going to highlight it in this cool salmon color. This groaning here, which typically people will look at and go, this is the Spirit of God giving you a private prayer language or speaking on your behalf through you in a way that you don't even understand or know. And or this is the Spirit of God giving you the spiritual or, the gift of tongues in operation here. Okay. But there's the third thing to note is this, that a lot of people miss, and I encourage you, don't miss it, is actually, this is not the only kind of groaning we see in this chapter. If you go down to verse 22, you're going to see this. We know that the whole creation has been what? Groaning together in the pains of childbirth until now. Okay? And not only the creation, but you're going to see in verse 23, we who have the Spirit, the first fruits of the Spirit, we also groan inwardly as we wait. So the groaning here, right, is actually not just the Spirit groaning, but creation groaning. We are groaning, right? This groaning is a deep displeasure with the way things are, right? It's waiting for and longing for what is ultimately coming. We're waiting for the adoption as sons, redemption, glorification, a future better reality. That's what the groaning is relating to in both of these instances, as well as the Spirit, okay? So when you get to verse 26, know this. The Spirit helps us in our weakness. We don't know what to pray as we ought to, but the Spirit himself intercedes for us with groanings too deep for words. In other words, us waiting for glorification with patience, us having weakness, us not knowing what to pray. I highlighted each of these ideas in this salmon color, right? All of those ideas relate to why it is that the Spirit is groaning on our behalf. It's the fact that he is helping us in the midst of our weakness. This is how the Spirit helps us. That's the fourth thing. The Spirit groaning is relating to our need to wait for glory, for redemption, with patience. And the way the Spirit helps us in our weakness is what's referred to as groaning and interceding for us, which is what we see in verse 25 and 26. That's the fourth thing. The fifth thing is that our weakness is that we don't always know what to pray here. That's the weakness that's specifically in mind in this context. I don't always know what to pray for, but the groaning of the Spirit of God is intercession or interceding on our behalf to make up for my weakness or my inability to know what to pray. So specifically, this intercession that we see the Spirit of God engaging in, referred to as groaning, it refers to, as we'll see in verse 27, it refers to the will of God. That's the fifth thing that you need to see. The groaning, the intercession, us not knowing what to pray, it's relating to the will of God. And he who searches hearts knows what is the mind of the Spirit, because the Spirit intercedes for the saints according to the will of God. So here we see, and I'm going to highlight this in blue for you, interceding is used twice here. We get something about intercession here, that groaning, the Spirit groaning, is a part of the way he intercedes for us in our weakness. The second piece of information we get is that the Spirit intercedes for us, again, the saints, but it's according to the will of God, okay? So our weakness here, the need for the Spirit to intercede for us with groanings too deep for words, is relating to the fact that I don't always know what the will of God is and how to pray for that. But the Spirit perfectly knows, okay? That's the fifth thing to see. The sixth thing you need to see is that this groaning here, it's referred to as too deep for words. I'm going to highlight that in yellow. The groaning is too deep for words. That's a characteristic of this kind of groaning, okay? So the groaning, it can't be expressed with words. That seems to be referring to any human language. The groaning is an inward sigh, it seems, in the Spirit, rather than any verbal expression of displeasure. Like Jesus groans in his spirit when he's displeased with the people. Creation groans, we groan, and the Spirit also is groaning here with what is too deep for words, and possibly the context seems to imply that the groaning is actually too deep for any kind of verbal expression or sound. And you go, how do you come to that conclusion? Well, because the kind of groaning we see contextually that will be related to the Spirit's groaning is creation groaning. How does creation groan? Well, it's kind of like the pains of childbirth until now. It's anticipation of what's coming. It's a displeasure with the way things currently are. I have not given birth to a child, but I've seen my wife. And when you give birth, you're not exactly pleased with the current state of affairs, right? Same with us. We groan inwardly. This is an inward groan. That's the key here. Creation doesn't exactly, depending on your view of creation, creation as a whole doesn't seem to speak and make verbal expressions of displeasure. Though it's pains of childbirth, you can go, well, women make, loud expressions of their displeasure in childbirth, right? I don't think this is the thing we should be hung up on. The point is, it's current pain and displeasure and suffering we're enduring, not necessarily the noise and expression that accompanies that. So creation groaning, right, in the pains of childbirth is likened to us groaning inwardly. The groaning is waiting for. It's I know what's coming, but there's a deep longing for it and a deep displeasure with the way things are, and I know this isn't it, and I'm frustrated, and there's suffering in my mortal flesh, and I'm just tired. That's the deep inward groaning. That's the key, is it's inward. And if it's inward, I don't know if it's being expressed outwardly necessarily with sound or words, which in my opinion kind of eliminates the idea, and I know there's other perspectives that are just as valid, but in my interpretation, I don't see this groaning as likely being the gift of tongues or some private prayer language, or even me expressing with my mouth my deep displeasure and longing for what's coming, okay? The last thing is this. The will of God, which the Spirit of God intercedes and groans according to. It's actually laid out in verse 28 all the way down to verse 30. So let me read it for you. It says this, and there. And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, right? For those who are called according to his purpose. For those whom he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son. This is not only talking about present tense sanctification right now. This is talking about ultimate conformity to the image of Jesus. Full glorification, full redemption, full resurrection, right? The removal of our current body to take on a glorified body, just like Jesus. Perfect conformity to the image of Jesus. That's coming. In order that he might be the firstborn among many brothers. And those whom he predestined, he also called. Those whom he called, he justified. And those whom he justified, he glorified. So here's the last thing you can't overlook. The will of God is generally outlined for us in verse 28 through 30. Okay, it's generally outlined. I say that specifically. The general will of God here is that the children of God will reach ultimate redemption and glorification. That will be their eternal end. Not the end of their existence, but, what is their destination? To be glorified. But the specifics of this will being applied to us real time right now in our personal lives, in our context, that's something only the Spirit of God perfectly and fully understands and can pray according to, right? In other words, the Spirit fully understands, and he will also ensure how the ultimate will of God in our lives is played out. There's a guaranteed outcome that is promised. You will be glorified. The Spirit of God groans in that direction. Creation groans in that direction. We groan in that direction. But until then, I don't always know what to pray specifically about the will of God real time in my life right now and how I should be praying for said circumstance. I know what's generally going to happen. The general will of God is that he will glorify his saints. But in the meantime, the specific detailed will of God for my personal life, here and now, in my context, I don't always know how to pray according to that. That's why it's weakness that the Spirit of God has to counterbalance and make up for with groanings too deep for words. Meaning this groaning is a kind of intercessory groaning prayer that the will of God will be perfectly, fully accomplished and realized in our life in a way that guarantees we will be glorified. We will be glorified with Christ. So those are 7 things you can't miss in this text to understand Romans 8:26 appropriately. Listen, if you want to learn how to read and study the Bible, you're frustrated, bored, overwhelmed, maybe you don't know where to start, maybe you're just, you read and nothing, makes sense, I encourage you to take our free 40-day Bible study course linked in the description below. We have a 27-day and 11-day, and you can also see it on abovereproachministry.com. All right, go check that out, and thanks for watching. Hey, thanks for watching this video. If you haven't already subscribed, go ahead and do that and hit the bell so you can be notified of any future videos that come out. And check out abovereproachministry.com. We have completely free Bible study courses, a 40-day program, a 27-day and 11-day program, all kinds of free resources. You can get a copy of my book. You can join our online church. You can get some merch. We have a bunch of stuff at abovereproachministry.com, and it's also linked in the description below. Go check that out, and thanks for watching.